Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Mark Rennick. I'm 38 years old, and I hold a doctorate in Near Eastern archaeology from the University of Chicago. For the past 7 years, I've worked as a field analyst for a private organisation known only to the public as RC Antiquities Recovery and Crypto History. Officially, ARC is a historical research and preservation contractor. Unofficially, we specialise in solving ancient riddles that traditional academia won't touch or is too afraid to. Most people don't know how close biblical history runs alongside political tension and how digging in the wrong place can set off international incidents. That's why we're quiet. That's why the names on our paychecks are always obscured under layers of shell corporations. And that's why, when we were summoned to Israel in early April to investigate what we were told might be a Second Temple-era ossuary site, we came in under diplomatic cover, using fabricated credentials. We flew in through Ben Gurion Airport under the guise of being with a university-backed architectural heritage group. Our cover story was that we were doing sonar analysis on structural weaknesses in old cisterns in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Silwan. What we were actually doing was responding to an encrypted packet from one of our field informants, a man named Elias Ben Daniel, a local geophysicist who worked with the Hebrew University's Institute of Archaeology. Elias had been running GPR, ground-penetrating radar, sweeps beneath the Kidron Valley when he found something a void beneath a private property that didn't match the usual profile of a water tunnel or grave shaft. The cavity, shaped like a dome, was about 25 feet underground, carved directly into the bedrock. What made it exceptional was its alignment with a cluster of unregistered first-century tombs on the southern slopes of the Mount of Olives, an area mostly off-limits due to political sensitivity. But this wasn't just another burial vault. The signal bounce-back indicated metallic resonance, either a lead-lined structure or significant contents. Elias didn't just ping us, he risked his career and his life. We met Elias in a nondescript cafe in the German colony. He wore a faded windbreaker and looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. "It's not just the void," he said in a low voice, glancing around nervously. "There's an inscription, scratched into the bedrock near the air vent shaft. Aramaic, partial, but I could make out 2 words. He pulled out a photo from a padded envelope and slid it across the table. The image was blurry, shot through a fiber optic lens snaked down a crack in the wall. But even through the distortion, I could make out the etching. Yeshua bar Yosef. Jesus, son of Joseph. "Could be a forgery," our field security lead, Samira Volkov, muttered. She was former Shin Bet, now contracted to RC for operations in hostile zones. "We've seen that kind of tag before on fakes." "Not at this depth," Elias replied, "and not with the secondary chamber I picked up behind it." That made me sit up. Most burial tombs in the Jerusalem necropolis were single chamber, family vaults. A secondary chamber meant something more ritual or reverent, possibly heretical, depending on your theology. We made a decision on the spot. Art Green lit a covert excavation team. We rented a modest residential flat across the street from the discovery site. The location was precarious, surrounded by contested territory, with several watchful neighbours. We operated mostly at night, rotating shifts to avoid suspicion. Our team was lean. Me handling site coordination and historical documentation, Samira security, logistics, and liaison work, Elias geophysics and structural analysis, Dr. Rina Saad, a paleoepigrapher and expert in first-century Semitic languages, André Leclerc, a French robotics engineer with a background in remote tunnel drones. We tunneled in with a modified utility borer disguised as a water infrastructure upgrade. By week 2, we reached the edge of the cavity Elias had located. The moment our borehead breached the rock into the chamber, everything changed. First, the sensors dropped. Andre's drone went dark the moment it crossed the chamber threshold, all telemetry cut off. The internal lights remained on for just 5 seconds, long enough to capture a 180-degree sweep of the space. What we saw made every hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't just a tomb, it was antechambered, carved with exacting precision into limestone, reinforced with Roman mortar, the type only used in the Herodian period. The walls bore intricate frescoes, none of them in traditional Jewish style. No graven imagery, but instead abstract gold leaf spirals and concentric circles with embedded glass mosaics in cobalt and crimson. And in the center, a raised ossuary platform, flanked by 2 collapsed columns and surrounded by what looked like half-melted candle sconces embedded directly into the floor. Atop the platform was a stone chest, 7 feet long, sealed with fused lead and etched with an emblem we didn't recognize. Rena went pale when she saw the freeze frame. "That's not Jewish," she said, voice barely a whisper. "And it's not Roman either." She pointed at the sigil, a stylized eye enclosed within a teardrop, pierced by a line that curved like a shepherd's staff. "I've only seen this once," she continued. "In an apocryphal text, the Odes of Solomon, there's a marginal sketch in a 12th century Syriac codex that matches this. They called it the Seal of the Just One. Elias crossed himself. He was usually rational to a fault, but something about the chamber rattled him deeply. We reinforced the tunnel, set up scaffolds, and began physical entry procedures. We had to be careful. Even a hairline fracture in that kind of sealed environment could compromise the contents. Worse, if anyone reported ancient artifacts being removed from Silwan without state permission, we'd face arrest, confiscation, or worse. 3 nights later, we opened the outer chamber. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and dry, like a vacuum seal. No mold, no rats, no insects, nothing living. The ossuary was real, hand-carved, bone white, sealed not only with lead but with a resin we later identified as bitumen, the same pitch used in Egyptian burial rites. The inscription on the lid was clearer up close. Yeshua bar Yosef, beloved teacher, taken, not broken. Rena stared at it for a long time. That's not a common epitaph." "No," I agreed. "And that middle line, taken, not broken, that's suggestive." We logged everything, photographed every inch. We didn't open the ossuary yet. That would require lab containment and neutral ground. But we did make a troubling discovery. At the back of the chamber was a small stone aperture, a square tunnel no more than 3 feet wide, leading into pitch blackness. Elias crawled halfway in with a boar snake cam and froze after about 15 feet. "There's something back there," he whispered. "Another chamber, smaller, no ossuary, just a pedestal. And on the pedestal, a sealed jar, terracotta, lidded with wax." We recovered it, using lift hooks. The jar was surprisingly light. Inside, nested in old linen, we found 3 items. A bundle of scrolls, mostly illegible, but in a mix of Aramaic and Greek. We identified the word Nazarios more than once. A fragment of wood, charred on one side, bearing what looked like ancient blood traces, and a small stone disc etched with the same eye teardrop symbol. Samira ordered us to stop work and initiate a full lockdown. "This isn't just archaeological," she said. "This is theological ordnance. If this gets out, half the world's going to want it or burn it." We didn't argue. That night, as we catalogued everything and prepared to transport the contents to our Ramla storage site, we heard a noise from the main chamber. Andre was the first to check. His voice cracked over the radio. "There's someone in here," he whispered. "I swear I saw a figure move behind the platform." Samira was down there in less than 30 seconds, weapon drawn. But there was no one. Only a faint warmth on the sensors, like a human body had just been there, and a strange residue on the stone floor, like oil, fragrant, almost sweet. That was the night we stopped sleeping, because that was the night the dreams started. We all had them different, but the same. Visions of light flooding into darkness, voices speaking in unknown tongues, and a figure faceless, glowing, weeping standing over an empty tomb. At first, we didn't talk about the dreams, not directly. None of us wanted to admit we were shaken. Our work demands a level of rational detachment. No room for personal symbolism or metaphysical interpretation. But as the same symbols reappeared, as the unease set in deeper with each passing night, we couldn't ignore it. The markings on our wrist didn't fade. Rena tried to dismiss them as irritation from some ancient compound, maybe old resins or mold spores. Elias proposed chemical testing. Nothing showed up. No pigment, no trace metals, just skin slightly raised in the pattern of the seal we'd seen on the stone disc. 3 days after the chamber breach, we moved the ossuary under armed escort to a climate-controlled arc containment unit located in Ramla. The building, posing as a historical archives warehouse, had been specially outfitted to handle rare and politically sensitive finds. Samira coordinated the convoy through back channels with sympathetic members of the Israel Antiquities Authority. Officially, we were transporting structural samples from Silwan for restoration analysis. Unofficially, we moved the chest wrapped in lead sheeting, inside a titanium crate, inside a refrigerated van surrounded by former IDF operatives. The lab had been prepped for a full containment breach protocol. Rena and I wore positive pressure suits, while Samira and Elias monitored from the secure viewing room. Andre stayed in the airlock, working the bore cam in case we needed internal visuals before opening. We recorded everything. 3 cameras, biometric telemetry, constant atmospheric readouts. We broke the seal on the ossuary using a heated diamond blade saw. The lid came off slowly, a hiss of stale air escaping, dry and metallic, as though we'd opened a pressurized safe. Inside, we found what we expected, and something we didn't. The skeletal remains were intact, remarkably preserved considering the centuries that had passed. The bones were arranged with care, arms crossed over the sternum, feet bound, head resting on a limestone wedge, but it wasn't the bones that made Rena stagger back. Laid across the chest was a folded cloth, linen, light brown with age, but stained in a way that made its outline unmistakable. Faint traces of blood, a central wound above where the heart would have been, smaller drops near the wrists and ankles, and a reddish bloom around the crown of the skull. Rena whispered, It's a burial shroud. But it's not just symbolic. This was used. Underneath the cloth, nestled against the ribs, was a sealed tube of hammered copper, no more than 10 inches long and capped at both ends. We had it x-rayed before opening. Inside were 2 tightly rolled sheets of papyrus, stitched together along one edge with thin bronze wire. The writing wasn't in Hebrew, it wasn't Greek, it was Latin, and the signature was clear, Pontius Pilatus. The entire room went silent. We brought in a paleography expert within 12 hours, a Vatican-trained linguist named Father Thomas Valenti, one of ARC's most discreet consultants. He flew in under the pretense of being a Jesuit academic, reviewing Crusader-era documents. When he saw the scroll, his face drained of color. "This is not just a confession," he said after 3 hours of translation. "This is a legal deposition, a sealed statement addressed to Emperor Tiberius." The scroll, dated roughly 36 CE, just 3 years after the traditionally accepted crucifixion date, was a personal document written in careful Latin script, bearing the official seal of the Roman governor of Judea. In it, Pilate spoke of an execution carried out under pressure from local authorities, naming the high priest Caiaphas directly. He wrote of his doubts, of omens, of a man who spoke not as a rebel, but as one unafraid of death, as if death were a door only he could open. The document described the public trial, the accusations, and the unease Pilate felt, even as he symbolically washed his hands of the affair. But the most shocking line was this: "I gave the order for burial to be swift, unmarked, yet the body disappeared within 3 nights, and the tomb I had ordered to be sealed was found open. The stone rolled aside from within. I do not believe we buried a man. I believe we buried a mystery. If genuine, this scroll would be the only surviving Roman record from Pilate himself, and it would shatter centuries of theological and historical interpretation. There was no triumphant declaration of faith, no divine epiphany, only fear, doubt, and reverence. Ark leadership authorized immediate lockdown of the scroll. It would not be published, not yet. We needed confirmation, radiocarbon testing, ink composition, papyrus fiber analysis, everything we could run without compromising its integrity. But even then, I noticed something strange. The scroll itself was wrapped in parchment far newer than the papyrus goat hide, tanned and aged no more than 4 or 5 centuries. Someone had repackaged the scroll long after Pilate wrote it. Someone who knew its value and wanted to preserve it. That led to our next revelation. Andre, ever methodical, scanned the inside of the ossuary again before resealing it. His sonar imaging picked up a compartment under the foot of the limestone platform, a false cavity no more than 10 centimeters deep. Inside, we found a bundle wrapped in cedar bark. Within it were 3 coins, 1 Roman denarius from the reign of Tiberius, 1 bronze Herodian prutar, and 1 coin we could not identify. It bore no emperor, no Hebrew script, only the eye teardrop sigil. Rena ran her fingers over the surface of the unknown coin. "This wasn't currency," she said slowly. "It's a marker, a token." "For what?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she unwrapped the final item buried beneath the bark. A shard of pottery, glazed black, with etched symbols forming a spiral pattern. Inside the glaze, embedded like fossilized ash, were microscopic fragments of bone. Not just any bone finger joints, likely from a single hand. And along the outer edge, the same phrase repeated in Aramaic and Koine Greek, "the one who writes in light." We had no idea what it meant. Not then. That night, the dreams returned, but they changed. This time, the figure was no longer weeping. It stood taller, more distinct, still faceless but now radiant, arms outstretched as if welcoming or warning. The voices were clearer, not words exactly, but tones that felt intentional. And in the final moment before waking, each of us saw a name etched in fire across the air. Nazarios. Elias collapsed the next morning. No pulse for 45 seconds. When he came back, he was babbling not in Hebrew, not in English. Rena recorded it and sent it for analysis. It matched a known phonetic pattern from the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically the community rule, a text attributed to the Essenes. The section he recited, word for word, translated as, "The righteous teacher shall rise, his words sealed in jars, his body marked in silence, and the scroll of the prince shall bear witness." It was at that point we all agreed, someone or something had buried this deliberately, not to preserve it, but to hide it, and we were starting to feel the consequences of unsealing it. Samira initiated extraction protocols. We were to break down the site in Silwan, erase all evidence, and move operations to our secure facility in Cyprus. But as we prepared to leave, a message arrived on the dark line from ARC's directorate. "Do not depart. New anomaly found near Bethphage. Coordinates attached. Drone en route. Possible 3rd chamber." I looked at the transmission signature. It didn't come from headquarters. It came from the tomb's internal drone, the one we lost connection with 5 days earlier. Its power had somehow turned back on, and it had sent a location, a place none of us had investigated, a hillside near the old road between Bethany and Jerusalem, the same road, according to some traditions, that the Messiah once walked before entering the city. It was just north of Bethphage, a gentle slope of scrub grass and limestone outcrops, unassuming and largely ignored by modern developers. The coordinates came through as a precise pin, buried beneath an old terraced olive orchard above a weathered Roman path. We confirmed the site using aerial LiDAR scans and historical overlays. What we found was both promising and disturbing. There was a subsurface cavity, not as deep as the Silwan vault, only about 10 meters down. But unlike a typical tomb, it wasn't hewn directly into the bedrock. The chamber had architectural features that shouldn't have existed from that era. Symmetrical octagonal layout, corbelled walls reinforced with a mixture of clay and volcanic ash, and, most notably, a sealed basalt entrance slab with iron pins anchoring it into place. It resembled no known Jewish, Roman, or Hellenistic burial practice. It was a hybrid design, like something constructed by someone who understood multiple cultures and was intentionally obscuring the true purpose. We approached the site just before dusk, under the cover of a windstorm that swept up from the eastern ridge. Local movement sensors were disabled via drone ahead of our arrival. Samira coordinated perimeter suppression while I led the excavation grid with Elias and Andre. The olive orchard had clearly been neglected for years. Moss covered the old terraces. The stone cistern at the base of the hill had long since dried out. We reached the chamber marker just before midnight. The top of the basalt slab was flush with the earth, but upon brushing away the soil and roots, we uncovered a chiseled inscription running along the perimeter in Aramaic. "Guard what is not yours, until he returns." Rena arrived 2 hours later with 2 additional translators and an RC field technician. She confirmed the inscription's date to between 50 and 150 CE. The grammar was consistent with sectarian communities, possibly Essene, maybe Ebionite, those early Jewish-Christian hybrids who were often treated as heretics by both camps. That alone suggested a cultic purpose. We debated for nearly 24 hours whether to open it. The Silwan tomb had already breached our expectations. The ossuary, the pilot scroll, the dreams. Now this chamber presented itself with an even more enigmatic purpose. And unlike the tomb, which had clear signs of mortuary intent, this structure seemed different, protective, almost sacred. It was Elias who pushed us forward. His reasoning was methodical. If we left this chamber unexplored and someone else found it later, we would lose both the narrative and the artifact context. Rena reluctantly agreed. Samira stood guard. The rest of us descended. The entrance slab came up slowly, lifted via hydraulic tension rods. As soon as the seal broke, we caught the scent dry, faintly metallic. Not unlike old incense or copper oxide, we descended into the chamber using a narrow spiral ramp carved into the southern wall. The interior opened into a geometrically perfect octagon, no wider than 15 feet across. The walls were lined with alcoves, each marked with a different symbol: the eye teardrop, the alpha and omega, a menorah, a fish, a vine. And in the center stood a pedestal of polished limestone. On it rested a sealed amphora, small, unassuming, about the size of a child's skull. Around its base, fine sediment had gathered in concentric ripples, as if the object emitted an unseen pressure. Andre swept the room with his drone scanner. The readings were bizarre elevated static interference, localized magnetic fluctuations, and an unusual hum detected at 18.98 Hz. That frequency, known in physics circles as an infrasound resonance, is often linked to feelings of unease, fear, and even hallucinations when experienced in closed environments. Yet the chamber had no moving parts, no machinery, no airflow. The amphora simply existed in stillness, as if it had always been there. Rena approached it cautiously. She didn't touch it at first, just observed it from inches away. "It's sealed with wax and linen thread," she murmured, voice tight with concentration. "But the thread's not frayed. That's impossible." I joined her. "You're saying it hasn't aged?" "Not like it should have. Not in this environment. There's no degradation. It's almost preserved or protected." We ran it through a portable spectrum imager. The contents appeared amorphous, neither solid nor liquid. There was a movement, but sluggish. Something suspended in fluid. We couldn't open it in the field. That would be recklessness. So we secured it, scanned the chamber for additional items, and began extraction prep. That's when the power failed. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness. Every light, every monitor, even the drone dead. Only our breath and the hum of the amphora remained. Then we saw it. On the far alcove wall, where the symbol of the vine had been carved, a faint glow pulsed outward, like heat behind a veil. The pattern shifted as though the stone itself breathed. And then, without warning, Elias fell to his knees. He began to speak again in the same ancient tongue he'd uttered during his previous collapse. Rena rushed to record. She later translated it to, "The vessel was hidden not for fear, but for mercy. The blood bears memory, the breath bears truth. Only the worthy shall carry the remnant." And then he collapsed completely. No vitals for over a minute. Samira administered emergency stimulants, and finally his pulse returned. His pupils were dilated, his wrists trembling, the mark now raised and red hot on his skin. We didn't wait. We carried him out, sealed the chamber, reactivated the slab, and called in emergency evac to our Cyprus facility via the Mediterranean route. Whatever we'd disturbed wasn't just historical. Back at Ark Cyprus, the amphora was placed in a level 3 biocontainment vault, not because we knew it was dangerous, but because we didn't know what else to do. Samples taken from the wax seal returned anomalous readings, high concentrations of myrrh, frankincense, and something we couldn't identify. A complex hydrocarbon compound, likely organic, with no match in our database. Then came the final piece, something none of us expected. The amphora was placed in a pressurized nitrogen chamber to allow imaging of the interior without disturbing the contents. What we saw was not a relic, it was a scroll, or rather, fragments of one floating in some kind of preservation fluid. The script was visible in places, but blurred in others. However, one phrase stood out under UV exposure, written in archaic Koine Greek. "I write this that he may return, not to walk, but to awaken." It was signed with 3 characters. Inze. We didn't understand what they meant, not then. But later, while reviewing the drones from the Silwan tomb, the one we thought had powered down and transmitted its final signal, Andre found something else. A frame we hadn't noticed, blurred, low light, but clear enough. The figure standing at the edge of the ossuary platform. Not a hallucination, not a shadow, a physical presence, cloaked, hooded, and on its wrist the same seal we bore. Worse still, the timestamp on the frame wasn't from the night of our incursion. It was from 3 hours before the ossuary was ever opened. Someone, or something, had been in the tomb before us, watching, waiting. We'd broken the seal, unlocked something, and now, somewhere in the hills between Bethphage and Jerusalem, it or he was moving. And as I lay awake that night, sleepless, watching the amphora glow faintly in the containment vault beneath 30 feet of reinforced earth, I remembered a line from the pilot scroll. "Not all tombs are made to rest the dead. Some are made to hold what must not return." The words haunted me more than I wanted to admit. For all of our careful rationalism, all our scientific rigor, there was something beneath the surface of this find. Something that no radiocarbon dating or spectral imaging could fully explain. And it was no longer just theory. It was manifesting in dreams, in physical reactions, in power systems that shouldn't have failed, in electromagnetic interference no geological structure could justify. We weren't just uncovering history anymore. We were walking through a trapdoor in time. The amphora sat untouched in Vault 3 for 6 days. We ran every test imaginable on the vessel itself. Its outer shell was of early Byzantine craftsmanship, but the seal, both the wax and the linen tie, was pre-Christian. The threads matched the same spin pattern as fabric found at Qumran, likely a scene in origin. The wax, when tested, contained traces of nard and balsam, identical in chemical profile to sacred embalming mixtures from Jerusalem's Second Temple period. Even more strange, The internal fluid displayed signs of antimicrobial suspension, an effect we didn't expect and couldn't replicate in controlled samples. The fragments inside remained perfectly preserved, as if no time had passed. Then came the breach. It wasn't planned, not officially, but someone opened the amphora. At 2:37 local time, the main security door into Vault 3 disengaged without a triggered alarm. The internal camera system looped itself on a 5-minute delay, overwriting all movement between 2:35 and 2:40. When the guard shift changed at 3 o'clock, they found the chamber door ajar. The containment pod had been accessed. The amphora's seal was cut, the lid set aside with surgical precision, and the scroll fragments inside had been removed and reassembled on the stainless steel table beside it. Nothing else in the vault had been touched. No sign of forced entry. No missing equipment. The biometric lock log showed only one registered entry during that time. Mine. Only I had no memory of going there. I was asleep in the adjacent wing. My vitals monitored remotely like everyone else. But my fingerprint and retinal scan were in the log. My ID was recorded, and even the hallway pressure sensors had registered my weight. Samira launched a full internal audit. She was convinced someone had cloned my access credentials, possibly an ARC insider, possibly a foreign intelligence asset. I didn't argue, but privately, I wasn't so sure. The scroll fragments had been gently arranged in a deliberate, symmetrical pattern, 3 central panels surrounded by 6 smaller ones, all placed in a ring. Rena and Father Valenti both worked on translating the text in shifts. What emerged, over the next 48 hours, was a narrative unlike anything we'd ever encountered. It wasn't a gospel in the traditional sense. It didn't recount miracles or teachings or parables. It didn't name apostles or locations. It wasn't written in any one language either. The scroll was a patchwork, early Aramaic, Koine Greek, and something older, possibly Proto-Hebrew, with sections so archaic even Rena struggled to identify the characters. The ink had iron oxide and carbon compounds found only in certain Judean cave pigments. But the message, once deciphered, was both eerily personal and catastrophically global. The speaker of the text did not refer to himself by name, but by title, the Witness. He described himself as the last of a small group tasked with hiding the vessel of the word, a body, a memory, and a final scroll not meant to be revealed until the forgetting was complete. He wrote of a cycle of light that had occurred once before, when the voice of the divine walked among mortals, not to lead, but to observe. He claimed the first tomb was built not by mourners, but by protectors, those who feared what the resurrection truly meant. According to the text, the figure known as the Nazarene was not simply executed. His body vanished because the breath of the world rejected his return. Not metaphor, not vision, but an event with real consequences. The scroll went further, suggesting that every resurrection account in early Christian tradition was distorted intentionally to hide the truth that the reappearance was not stable, that what rose was not the same as what was buried. That's when we understood the final symbol on the amphora's inner lining, hidden in wax, revealed only under thermal light. A double sigil, the seal of the Just One, and beneath it, a spiral descending into a flame, not rebirth, containment. The final section of the scroll was direct, a warning. Do not speak the name, do not carry the breath. The vessel was sealed not for preservation but for delay. When it opens, the cycle begins anew. The world shall not remember the first voice, only the echo. No religious manuscript, no heretical gospel, no apocryphal fragment ever hinted at something like this. Not the Gnostic texts, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, not even the cryptic Enochian tablets. This was something older, a story rewritten before the first scripture was ever penned. ARC convened an emergency quorum. Directors dialed in from every continent, analysts from CERN, linguists from the Vatican Library, ex-intelligence officers with ties to both Israeli and Jordanian antiquities enforcement. A decision was made that night. The scroll would not be released, not even to internal archives. It would be resealed, hidden again, possibly destroyed. But the vote never mattered, because by then, the damage had already been done. Elias vanished. No note, no GPS tag. His communications were wiped. He left behind only his encrypted research logs, and inside them, a final scanned map. It depicted a third site, south of Qumran, near the caves where the original Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. A red marker pulsed in the center of a wadi long thought to be inaccessible due to frequent flooding and unstable ground. Beneath it, a note written in Elias's hand. He walks the threshold. The tomb was not empty, it was incomplete. Samira was the one who demanded we find him. Rena tried to resist, but in the end we all went. Because whatever this had become, it had passed beyond archaeology. We were chasing not just a man or a mystery, but the unfinished sentence of history itself. We reached the wadi by chopper, touching down under full stealth protocols at dawn. The entrance Elias had mapped was real. A narrow fissure in the rock, invisible from satellite, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Andre sent in a fiber optic scope. The tunnel led down, curving through ancient limestone, finally opening into a chamber unlike anything we had seen before. There was no ossuary, no amphora, no scroll. There was only light, not from the sun, not from our torches, but from the walls themselves, pulsing, phosphorescent veins of mineral running through the stone, like bioluminescence. And standing at the center was a figure, cloaked, still, not Elias. We couldn't see the face, just the seal, glowing red on the figure's right wrist. As we stepped forward, every light we carried blinked out. Rena collapsed. Samira drew her weapon but froze mid-motion. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then a voice spoke, not aloud, but inside each of our minds, simultaneous, unified, ancient. You sought the word, you opened the seal, now remember the breath. And then the light exploded. When I woke, we were back on the chopper. No sign of the figure, no memory of how we got out. Rena had burns on her palm in the shape of the sigil. Samira had gone completely silent. She hasn't spoken since. Andre quit the project and entered a monastery on Mount Athos. I've tried to walk away. I can't. Because every night I hear the voice. Because every night the tomb opens again. And because somewhere I know Elias is still out there, following the cycle, leaving behind the final gospel. Not a story of salvation, a record of return. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.